Over to Sheila now. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. We're moving on now, and we're going to be meeting Diana Crump and Ozzy Glover and Claire Mortimer. And Diana Crump is up first, and she works for an organisation called Options Devon.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to see if we can... Just 2 ticks. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And I have to say, before I start my presentation, I'll just ask, can everybody see the screen if I'm stood here? Or am I in your way? I'm in your way, aren't I? Okay, thank you. I absolutely empathise with the lady who spoke about the difference in how you're heard depending on what roles you occupy. And personally have found a similar experience in terms of working for the public sector, being seen in a particular role, and then moving to the voluntary community sector and attending meetings often with the same people and actually being treated in a very different way. So I think there's something for me that really resonated with the point that was made earlier, so thank you. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we in Living Options and also through Fusion have developed a stronger voice for disabled and deaf people. And at the end of my presentation, because I thought it would be quite good to do something a little bit more controversial, I'd like to talk a little bit about my thoughts around how user-led organisations can and should work more effectively with the more mainstream infrastructure, voluntary and community sector organisations. Some pretty pictures of Devon, in case anybody didn't recognise them. Living Options Devon, we're a charity. We've been going for about 20 years now, and it was our 20th birthday last year. And I was just sharing in the icebreaker with my colleague Claire, one of the things that we did in terms of thinking about people who are perhaps particularly find it difficult to have their voices heard is those people who are housebound. And for our conference, for our 20th anniversary, we actually took a video camera into this lady's house, who had been housebound for 20 years, and we asked her what it was that she wanted to say to the conference and how she wanted to portray herself in terms of her voice. And it was a really, really moving experience. It was a clip of about 4 or 5 minutes, where we just gave her the opportunity to speak about her world, her life, about the things that she felt was important. And then at the anniversary event, we had lots of commissioners, lots of incredibly important people, and we then videoed the responses and the discussion and the debate and took that back to her. So our workers took the response back. And I think for some groups of people, it isn't as simple as just empowering people in a meeting. It's much, much more complicated than that. And that's a little bit about what Living Options has tried to do over the last 20 years. Getting feedback here. So our vision as an organisation is a fully informed, accessible and inclusive society in which every individual has choice and opportunity to achieve their full potential and to take part as an equal and valued citizen. We've got about 800 members, all of whom have disabilities or are from the deaf community. We specialise particularly for people with physical disabilities, but also sensory disabilities. And the most important thing we think about our organisation is what's known as user-led. And for some of you in the room, that's a very familiar term. For others of you, it might be less familiar. And what we mean by user-led is at least 80% of our Board of Trustees have a disability themselves or from the deaf community, and the majority of our staff have a disability. So when we recruit staff, We try and ensure that we give as much support as possible in order to enable people who maybe haven't had opportunities previously to occupy roles within our organisation who also have a disability. When I took up post as Chief Executive with Living Options 4 years ago, what I felt was really important was to find out from our service users and the people we work with what it is they felt was wrong in Devon. And I had a number of workshops where I just sat and listened to what people wanted to say to me. And the main thing that people said was that in Devon at that time, 4 years ago, there was very little advocacy support given to people. So people didn't really understand what their human rights were. They didn't really have the opportunity to speak up and talk about the things that were important to them, and they didn't have the support to access health and social care. So we got a small amount of funding. It was a tiny amount of funding. And we worked with other organisations across Devon, other voluntary and community organisations, to find out what was there already and what was needed in the future. And to cut a very long story, which we think is interesting, but it's a long story short, we are now formed beautifully into what's called the Devon Advocacy Consortium. We're a consortium of, I think it's 6 organisations who have been providing specialist advocacy in mental health, learning disability, physical and sensory disability, carers, and we also have some specialist people on our board. For example, we have a rep from the BME community, we have a representative of small voluntary and community organisations, and the funding that we get as a consortium, we work with the people in Devon to ensure that we're actually providing the right level of advocacy at the right place. And the reason I include this in my presentation is because it seems to me that the most important thing with people having voice is to start with the individual. And advocacy, this type of advocacy, is a one-to-one based advocacy service. And that's where you start, I think, with people. It's about giving people a voice as an individual before we start to think about some of the stuff I'm going to move on to, which is about group and organisational voice. Nothing about us without us. That's one of our straplines in Living Options. That's the idea that disabled people and people from the deaf community should be involved in decisions about themselves, so that at all levels, strategic and also operational level, people have the opportunity to input into decisions about services that are being provided. We base everything we do on the social model of disability, and I know at the previous conference was a really helpful summary, I think, of the social model of disability. In simple terms, how we look at life is that the barriers that are put up by society, and if those barriers are removed, then everybody will have equality of opportunity. Pictured here is Wendy Hillier, who's one of our trustees, and she has been working with Living Options. She came to us as somebody who needed some support 20 years ago, and just in the last 6 months she's been appointed to our board of trustees. That is it for me, for Living Options. It's about working with people, maybe sometimes over a long period of time, and people then having the opportunity to really shape the direction of our organisation, but also what happens externally. I suppose a really important part of our ethos is that because people who work with us have a disability themselves or who are from the deaf community, they understand the issues, not from a book, but because they've actually lived that life. And we have a membership association. We've got 800 members, rising all the time. This is the backbone of Living Options. It's this whole idea about being in a safe environment, people feeling comfortable to talk about the things that are important to them. And from that, what we do then as an organisation is to provide, if you like, the platform and the opportunity for people to have those same conversations with the people who have influence in, for example, the county council. So it's moving from safe environments in a planned way to where people feel empowered and enabled to say what they want to say. This is one of our people that work with us, and we're currently in the process, through a whole lot of people, of developing what's called the Devon Disability Network. And the Devon Disability Network is a representative network of people with disabilities who are elected by other people with disabilities to represent their particular area. So it's divided into geographical areas, and we recently ran some elections which caused some great excitement, and people put themselves forward, or their friends or colleagues put themselves forward. And what we find with the disabled community in Devon is there's an awful lot of people who are oh, thank you. Okay, explain it. Who are incredibly active members of the community, and what we're doing is we're harnessing that activity in order to strengthen the voice of disabled and deaf people across Devon. These hands belong to Justine Smythe, who leads our deaf training team. We have a team of deaf awareness, equality trainers, and we train British Sign Language. We're accredited to level 1 and level 2. Christy, who's sitting very quietly, is our lead project manager for a really innovative and exciting project that's funded through the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is our deaf-led advocacy, information and advice service. And Christy, without wishing to embarrass her, as a leader within the deaf community, has developed, and I think what she'd be most proud of, is a database of 350 people for whom BSL is their first or preferred language within Devon, who we now tell about what our services, support them, enable them to access services that perhaps non-deaf people would access quite naturally, but it's more difficult for the deaf community. And I think one of the inspirational things about that project and why it enables deaf people to have their voice heard is it's a visual project. So everything, hence lots of pictures today, is about visual, what people see, because that's really important. You're not supposed to read any of the writing on this slide, in case you're worried about that. It's just really to show that one of the most important things we believe in our organisation, which we wanted to share with you, is our research and development department. And things like the advocacy work that we've done has been successful because we've been able to present research, robust research, in a way that can't be disputed by the public sector and by other organisations. So we actually are commissioned by lots of organisations to undertake research into the issues for disabled people, and then we present that research back in order to make changes for the better. And one of the things was we were commissioned by the Devon County Association of the Blind and Thomas Pocklington Trust to evaluate their befriending service. And that was really, once we'd done that evaluation, that organisation could then utilise that information to get more sustainable funding. But obviously we were doing it as an independent, separate organisation. So that's a bit about Living Options. So I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour as to what we try to do and what we think we're achieving. As usual, the government came up with a target. And this particular target was that by 2010, each locality should have a user-led organisation. And we thought, great, that's Living Options. We're a user-led organisation. We do all those things. We've been doing it for 20 years. We can tick that box and we can be the ULO for Devon. Wrong. The Department of Health put criteria around their ULOs. And to be a ULO, as per the Department of Health criteria, you have to cover all disabilities. So what a lot of counties did was they devised a new organisation which was in competition with all the existing organisations. And the funding went to the new organisation and the existing organisations all ended up not having any funding. Luckily, I saw one of these funding things and put in a bid to develop a consortia of a number of user-led organisations within Devon. So we've joined up with two other organisations, and we've now got a user-led board across a number of other voluntary and community organisations. And between us, we meet the criteria. So we are the user-led organisation. When I say for Devon, just because we're in Plymouth, that's Devon County Council area, we're actually working with Plymouth City Council for Plymouth to develop their own user-led organisation, because our belief is that disabled people should be in control of their localities, and just because we in Exeter might have, oh, fantastic ULO, that doesn't mean to say it's right for Plymouth. So working with both Torbay Unitary and also with Plymouth now, for them to develop the right consortia, the right organisation for their disabled and deaf people in their area. We did a visioning event. One of the issues with consortia working is the buzzword, everybody wants to do partnerships. The problem is if you don't have the same value sets. So we did a lot of work around what are our values. And this was what we came up with. And when I say we, for example, user-led means equal say, came from a series of workshops we did with groups of people with learning disabilities, and that was something that they felt very strongly was the way they wanted to describe user-led. So the words have come from some very detailed workshop development. And we now have a Fusion board, and what's so important about Fusion is that all the people who sit on the board are people with disabilities and the deaf community themselves. So we have 2 representatives from West Bank, which are carer reps. We have Devon Link Up, which is learning disabilities. Be Involved Devon, which is mental health survivors and people with mental health issues. Living Options Devon, I'll talk to you about. Rejuvenation, people from the BME community who have also got a disability. And Senior Council in terms of older people. And we've picked those organisations because they're all user-led. They all have people on their boards who are running the organisations who recognise those issues. It's all very well having a big board. The important thing is what we've actually done. So the first thing we did was we worked on a human rights training pack, and we worked with a number of groups, people with learning disabilities across Devon through the parliaments, through the learning disability parliaments. And we developed a training pack, obviously fully accessible, which was all about raising awareness of human rights. And that was something that we had funded through the Department of Health. And if anybody's interested in any of these tools or anything, obviously we can provide these for you. The Joint Engagement Board, we worked in co-production with Devon County Council to develop a place where all the involvement and consultation work would be taken. And these are people, again, service users sitting on this board. And that board would decide on the priorities and the amount of resource that should actually be allocated to the different areas. In the Fusion Gateway, we have a Fusion development worker whose role is to ensure that all consultation and involvement is A, properly done, so it's accessible and we have enough time and all of those things, but also we have feedback back to the people involved in the consultation so that people actually know what's happened as a result. And the Putting People First reference group is a group of service users and carers who Devon County Council, under the social care reforms, use not entirely but in part to test out ideas and to think about whether some of the ideas they've got are going to work for people on the ground. And finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit, having talked a bit about living options and Fusion and working in consortia, a little bit about how the voluntary and community organisations, what I call the traditional infrastructure organisations, might think about working proactively and helpfully with the ULOs, the user-led organisations. I've recently been appointed as chair of the Devon Consortium for my sins, and so I've been having lots of conversations with myself about, I take that hat off and I put that hat on. What does that mean, and how should we be thinking about these things? And I have to say, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. ULOs, it seems to me, are part of the voluntary and community sector, beginning, middle, and end. We need to be integrated, we need to be part of that process. And what we mustn't do, however, is think that service user and carer voice represents the voluntary sector. Voluntary sector voice is separate and distinct from service user and carer representation, and what I keep arguing, I don't know how successfully, is that you need both. So if you've got a strategic group that's making decisions about things, we need people who live experience, and we need people who understand the voluntary community sector and know where resource and issues can be taken and so on and so forth. And so we've been arguing for both sets of representation, so I just wanted to share that in terms of what we're arguing for. And we have been successful with some of our major groups. And then I think there's lots and lots of shared value between ULOs and the voluntary community sector. Training. I don't think user-led organisations always recognise how brilliant, for example, the CBS network are in providing training. We try and do it ourselves, but actually there's a really good resource there. But on the converse side of that coin, I think user-leds can reach people who perhaps the voluntary community sector infrastructures might not be able to reach. So by working in partnership, you can have, and we've done that a lot, you can have some really good partnerships. And ULOs increasingly are commissioning other voluntary and community sector organisations to provide infrastructure support. There's quite a lot of controversy about that. Some user-leds only want to work with other user-leds. Certainly our view as Fusion is that we want to work with the widest voluntary and community sector available to us, as long as the user-led values are at the core of everything. That's the bit for me. And I think user-led, as I said about the research, can provide some independent feedback in terms of the services being provided for disabled people and their carers. So I hope you found my presentation thought-provoking and interesting. My final thoughts in terms of a summary are just, in terms of some of the lessons, because we're making it up as we go along, like everybody, making lots of mistakes, is to maximise impact and effectiveness. It's got to be about true user-led values. Nothing about us without us. Empowering individuals, starting with the social model. And I can't emphasise the support and access needs being met. A lot of people are still excluded because they haven't been provided something in the right format, and communication and so on. Service users and carers at the centre. I do think advocacy and information giving has become not quite so sexy these days, but it's a really, really important part of empowerment and robust research. And finally, as well as that operational stuff, which is really important, it's about how we as organisations can support people to work strategically. Partnership and consortium working is here to stay. We've been commissioned by the Department of Health to provide a toolkit for organisations, user-leds, who want to work in consortia, which I'm just finishing the final draft. It'll be launched at the Equality Southwest event in March. So do look out for that. It's got lots of tips and hints based on lots of organisations' experiences. Co-production is the flavour of the month, working with our commissioners rather than banging on the table against them. And certainly we've had some success with that. You do need to be clear about your values. We can't do everything, and I do think it's important that we recognise to focus resource, not to try and spread ourselves too thinly. As voluntary community sector, we all end up doing far too many hours, trying to do far too many things, and part of strategic planning, I think, is only doing the things that have the maximum impact. And finally, what today's all about, I think, is strong networks, and talking to people and listening to people is really, really important. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to being on the panel, I think, for some questions later on.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, that was extraordinary and very, very thought-provoking. There's lots of things we'll pick up later. What we're going to hear, though, is our three representatives from different sectors first, and then we're going to open this to a sort of discussion and forum afterwards.